Well, welcome to lecture number 110 on Rambam Mor Nevuchim. For those that watch the recording and who are here, when I say page numbers, I'm using the Shlomo Pinis edition of the Rambam, second volume. We are about to start chapter 24 in part 3, which is on page 497. In this chapter, Rambam is going to discuss a very difficult idea, which appears in the Torah and Chazal, and he's going to give his take on it. It's the question of what's known in Hebrew as a nisayon, or a test, or a trial, right? And the concept is the thought that God might give us a difficult trial, a difficult test, in order to see how we perform on this test, right? And the test more often than not, includes some form of suffering, something difficult. So, and there's obvious philosophical problems and issues with this entire concept, and that's what Rambam is going to deal with. Does the Torah really mean what it seems to mean? And that's what he's going to discuss. So chapter 24, page 497. Let's see how Rambam deals with this question. So he says, the subject of a trial is also very difficult, right? Remember, he just completed, not completely finished, but he just finished the bulk of his discussion of the idea of why there is suffering, right? And one of the things that, why good people suffer, why, it was a question that he dealt with until now in depth. And one of the things that was clear is that Rambam insisted that God is just. He doesn't make people suffer for no reason. There is some justice involved. But remember, he also acknowledged in prior chapters that a lot of the suffering that we have in this world is suffering that comes from other sources. People decide to do things to others. Nature has it. Often we suffer because of decisions that we make that are bad decisions that lead in the wrong direction, or things like that. So now in chapter 24, again, I see some people joining us now. So chapter 24, page 497 in Shlomo Pinis edition. So here we go. The subject of a trial, when God gives us a trial, is also very difficult. It is one of the greatest difficulties of the Torah. Now, what does that mean, one of the greatest difficulties? When the Rambam says that, as we've learned until now, what he means is it seems that the Torah is telling us a philosophical idea that doesn't work with Rambam's understanding of how the world works, right? So when the Torah says something that doesn't match up with Rambam's philosophical understanding of the Torah, he will tell us this is a difficult thing in the Torah, right? This is his way. So this idea of a nisayon, the idea of a test, just doesn't work. There's a problem. We need to explain it. Okay, what do I mean? What's the problem? So the Torah mentions it in 6 passages, and I shall make clear to you in this chapter. There are 6 different places where the Torah explicitly discusses the concept of a test, right? What is generally accepted among people regarding the subject of a trial of an nisayon is this. Now, what the Rambam is going to say is generally accepted. Most of us that have been wandering around the Jewish world most of our lives probably think that this is the correct understanding, what the Rambam is mentioning now. What he's saying, what the people generally understand, is still, to this day in 2025, what the people generally think is the understanding, right? But the Rambam is going to smash the whole idea and say it differently, right? And what is the general understanding? That God sends down calamities upon an individual without there having been preceded by a sin, in order that his reward be increased, right? In other words, God puts us through a difficult challenge, right? I am sure that some of you have come across somebody at some case, whether they were talking to you when you were going through something hard or difficult, or something you may have said to yourself when you were going through something hard or difficult, or something you may have heard someone say to someone else when they were going through something that's hard and difficult. And they would say, well, God is testing you to show how you can get through this. This is the situation that you're in is a test by God to show that you're going to come through this test victorious. And in the end, it's going to be better for you that you went through something like this. I venture to guess that most of you have experienced such thoughts and ideas and have seen people say them. However, the Rambam says this principle is not at all mentioned in the Torah in an explicit text. There is no place in the Torah that even suggests that such an idea is true. There is no such thing. And there is in the Torah only one passage among the six, which we'll see the six as we go through this chapter. But the bottom line is there's one places whose external meaning suggests such a notion. That if you read the verse at its external simple meaning of the words, you will come out with such a notion, and I shall explain its meaning. But I will explain to you what it really means, even though its external meaning seems to suggest that the popular understanding of the Nisayon is what the Torah is actually teaching. However, the Rambam lays down the following. It's impossible that that's what the Torah really means, because this principle of the Torah that runs counter to this opinion is that contained in this dictum, a God of faithfulness and without iniquity, right? God doesn't do that. He doesn't make people suffer just because he's having fun testing you out. It's just not the way it works, right? God doesn't make people suffer unless if God is doing something, it's because the person deserves that something. Right now, remember how Rambam explained to us already over and over again when we say the term when God is doing something, automatically our brains go to the popular thought that God is doing in his providence. He's making things happen by pulling strings. Remember, Rambam smashed that already, right? He's thinking you have to turn your more Nevuchim brain on. And God doing something means, right, according to Rambam, the way God created the world is such that such and such will happen when such and such happens, right? So in other words, what you have to remember that. So, and God did not set up a world in which people just suffer for tests. That's not how it works. The principle, so nor do all the sages profess this opinion of the multitude, right? The Chazal don't also agree, because he brings the famous dictum of Chazal. Now, Rambam is not going to bring the places in Chazal which seem to suggest that the popular understanding is the correct understanding of the Torah. And mind you, there are many Jewish thinkers that do interpret it in the standard way that he just mentioned. So, but the Rambam is obviously disagreeing. But one Chazal that the Rambam says that supports his assertion, where he says that for they say sometimes there is no death without sin and no sufferings without transgression, right? Now, that's a famous dictum of Chazal, right? You know, ein yisurin below chet. There's no suffering without any sin. What's interesting is when the Rambam voices this here, he's also giving us a hint as to how he understands that statement of Chazal, right? In other words, that if there is suffering, there is pain, it's because somebody did something not right in the way they lived their life, right? Anything that's happening, that suffering is happening because the people are doing something wrong, right? We didn't keep the rules the way we were supposed to. We didn't live the way we were supposed to. We didn't follow the dictums that we were taught by God how to live in this world in a moral and ethical and proper Torah observant way. So therefore, suffering occurred, right? So it's impossible that someone could have suffered just out of the blue. So, and this is the opinion that ought to be believed by every adherent of the Torah. And remember, I've been translating when he says the law as the Torah, which is consistent with a lot of other translators, and it just sounds a little better in modern English. Who is endowed with intellect, for he should not ascribe injustice to God, may he be exalted above this, so that he believes that Zayd, right? Remember, Zayd is like we would say today, Joe, or, just a typical name, Jane or Jane Doe or John Doe or whatever. So Zaid and Omar is the Rambam's in his Cairo Arabic speaking world. Zaid and Omar were the typical names. So I believe that Zaid is innocent of sin and is perfect, and that he does not deserve what befell him. However, the external meaning of the trials mentioned in the Torah, when the Torah mentions trials and nisyonot in the passages in question, is that they took place in order to test and receive information so that one could know the degree of faith or the degree of obedience of the individual or nation in question. And this is the great difficulty, because if that's the external meaning, and that's what it sounds like, it's very big difficulty, especially in the story of the Akeidah, of the binding, of the Akeidat Yizchak. Now, I want the Akeidat Yizchak, the Rambam is going to address here, and I'm going to read to you from some other scholars that explain how the Rambam understands the Akeidah. And if it answers, I know the Akeidah is probably, I mean, probably the most, but certainly one of the most difficult to understand chapters in the Torah, especially in the modern mind, right? Especially to us today. It's just, it gets more and more difficult to read that and not cringe and not wonder, like, what in the world is happening here? So I'm going to read to you, we're going to learn what the Rambam has to say, and I'm going to read to you from someone, and I'll tell you who in a minute, who explains what the Rambam is saying in a really beautiful way. So we'll have a chance to, whether or not I'll answer all the problems we've ever had with the Akeidat Yizchak today, I remains to be seen. You'll tell me at the end of the lecture, but I think I'll shed some light on it, which is really how the Rambam understands it, which is really very interesting understanding, which will at least answer many of the questions that are bother most of us when we read that. So anyway, which was known only to God and to the two individuals of God, to one of whom, right? In other words, the Akeidah, which is written as if it's a test, right? No one knew what was going on. There's no place in the Torah where it says that Abraham announced to the world, I was told. In fact, one of the weirdest parts of the story of the Akeidah is if that Abraham was trying to teach the world a lesson, right? Or if he was trying to, like, why didn't he announce, I'm going to sacrifice my son because God told me? I mean, like, he didn't even tell Sarah, which is another weird thing. Like, he didn't tell his own wife where he was. He didn't tell Isaac himself where he was going, right? The whole thing just, like, so the only one who knew was God and Abraham, right? So, to one it said, for now I know that thou fearest God, right? Now I know that you fear God. In the same regard, it's dictum, for the Lord your God tries you out, tests you to know whether you do love God, and so on. And also with regard to when the Torah says to know what was in your heart, and so on. Now I will resolve all these difficulties for you. So now that I've set up the problem, if I'm correct, the Rambam says that God doesn't play games with us like this, and He doesn't make us suffer in order to just see if we can pass the test, right? Right? That's not how it works. So then what is the Torah teaching us when it tells us you're going through a test and the test is going to tell us whether or not you're faithful to God? What is the Torah doing? What are the meanings of these stories, especially the story of the Akeidah? What's happening? So no, here's the bottom line that you have to understand these things. That the aim and meaning of all the trials mentioned in the Torah is to let people know what they ought to do or what they must believe. Right? When the Torah tells you a story, it's trying to teach you a lesson in how we are supposed to behave, right? Or a lesson in what we should know, a fact, a truth that we're supposed to learn from it, right? So the purpose of every single story in the Torah is to teach me and you and all of us, right, an idea, right? And either an idea that's true or a mode of behavior that we should engage in, or a mode of behavior that we should not engage in. In other words, it's meant to teach us a practical lesson, right? This is number one. Accordingly, the notion of a trial consists, as it were, in a certain act being done, the purpose not being the accomplishment of that particular act. When the Torah tells us that X, Y, Z happened, it's not here to tell me, right, that X, Y, Z happened. That's not so important. I mean, maybe it was important in a small way within its context to the people who, in the time of history when that particular story occurred, but that's not the point. Billions of stories happened in the world, right? The Torah chose to tell us that story in order that we should learn from it a lesson, a truth, a lesson in how we are supposed to act, right? So, but the latter is being a model to be imitated and followed. It's showing me a story so that I should learn from it. Okay, how do I now act in my life so that my life will be more proper and on the right path? Or in the life of a nation, how do I make my decisions as a nation, how to move forward and learn from the lessons of the past? So thus the interpretation of to know whether you love, it doesn't mean, right, in order that God should know. God is not testing because He wants to see whether, right? That's ridiculous, right? God doesn't say, I'm going to put you through this because I want to find out if you really love me or not, right? God knows what you're going to do. The whole thing doesn't make sense, right? So the meaning resembles that of its dictum, to know that I am the Lord that does sanctify you, the meaning of which is, in order that religious communities should know. I'm showing you this story so that you should learn a lesson from this story, right? I want you to learn because I'm showing you how this particular person or this particular group of people behaved when they went through the trials and tribulations that they went through. And from the fact that you learn from them something, you should learn something about how you should act when you're presented with similar trials and tribulations and problems and so on. So if a man claiming prophecy, so the meaning of which is the religious communities, I said that. In the same manner, when the Torah says, right, if a man claiming prophecy arises, and if you see his suggestions tend to make one believe in the truth of his claim, the guy comes and starts talking to you about he shows you signs and he shows you miracles and things that make you want to believe that what he's telling you is the truth, right? So know that God wished to make known hereby to the religious communities the extent of your certitude with regard to his law. The in the Goodman Lieberman edition that I've started quoting from recently more, so they mention here that that it's clear that Rambam is trying to tell the people who are in the time when Islam was very strongly trying to push people to convert to Islam, and there's a huge amount of pressure to the Jewish community that Rambam was talking to, right? So, and they come to you with all sorts of reasons and explanations why you should follow the path of Muhammad, right? And Rambam is saying that God, when He taught us and said "Leman nasoscha," I should read that part. Hold on, from the Torah. Give me a second. I think I pulled it up here. Give me a minute. Oh yeah, so it's in Devarim in Deuteronomy 13. It says, "Ki yakum b'kirbecha navi." If a prophet gets up, or chalem chalom, or a dreamer, v'nasane lecha osum face. He gives you some miracle, some sign. Uvaha os face, and the sign comes, right? And then he says, "Nelcha achrei. Let's go after a different god." So it says, "Lo tishmael devrei anaviyahu." Don't listen to him. Ki menaseh Adonai Elohechem eschem, because God is testing you. Ladas, to know, hayishchem ohavim es Adonai Elohechem b'chol v'avchem b'chol nafshechem. So the point here is not that God is testing you, right? In the sense to find out what it is that you're going to do. What Rambam is saying here is that God is telling you, right? This is the way you're supposed to behave in a situation like this. When you're challenged with miracles and miracle cures and all kinds of signs to say, follow me because look, I walk on water. Follow me because look, I fly up to the sky on my horse. Or follow me because I do all kinds of signs and wonders. I cure the sick. I heal the this. I do all kinds of magic stuff, right? When people present to you that way, go with what you know to be true. Don't go with that kind of nonsense. So he at the bottom in the other version, he quotes the Rambam. On his comment on this paragraph, he says as follows. He quotes from the Rambam and says, "It was not for the signs," and this is the Rambam from the Mishnah Torah, "that he performed that Israel trusted Moshe, our teacher Moshe. We didn't go after Moshe because he performed miracles. Faith based on signs always leaves in one's mind some lingering doubt. If your faith is based on somebody's performing magic tricks, right, then that doesn't bring any truth to your mind, right? That always leaves in your mind some doubt. Perhaps these were some kind of trickery or sorcery. Maybe he just knows how to pull magic stick, right? So all the portents Moses performed in the desert were to meet needs, not to prove him a prophet. When Moshe performed the miracles that he did them under certain circumstances because there were certain needs. But those were not the reason why we follow him. Why then did we believe in him? Because we stood at Mount Sinai and saw with our own eyes and no strangers and heard with our own ears. In other words, we had a revelation of truth. We had a revelation at Sinai in which we saw and knew and heard the truth. So we stick with the truth because it's true, not because Rambam goes on and there's other places where he says similar things, right? But we don't follow because of signs and things. So that's really what the Rambam is referring to here, right? He's saying that the bottom line is that he's trying to teach you by saying not leman nasoscha to find out what you're going to do, but leman nasoscha in order to show you. It's interesting, the word nes, which is usually often translated as a nisayon, as a test. A nes is also a word for a sign, right? A signpost, or a flag even, right? So it's actually, the Rambam is really just flipping the same word and saying we should really look at its other translation. It's to show you how you're supposed to act when you're confronted with this. Somebody confronts you, but you know that the truth is not with that person. Don't follow him because of his trickery, his sorcery, his magic, or even because of his strength or power. Stick with the truth. Stick with what you know to be right, right? So may be exalted, and your apprehension of its true reality. Also to make known that you do not let yourselves be deceived by the deceptions of a deceiver, and that your faith in God cannot be disturbed. You know the truth. This will be a support for everyone who seeks the truth. For he will seek out, I'm at top of 499, for he will seek out the beliefs that are so firm that one has them. He pays no attention to the man who tries to compete through working a miracle. Don't come to me with telling me, oh, but you got to believe in it. I mean, the Rambam is making a direct attack here. I mean, it's not really, it's barely even between the lines against, the followers of Jesus and Muhammad, right? Don't come to me and say, oh, look, he walked on water. No, 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 don't do that. You know what's right. You stick with what's right, right? And if someone comes to you and tries to convince you by using such nonsense, right, you don't follow them. For this man issues a call to believe in impossible things, whereas a competition as to miracles is only useful when something possible is claimed, as we have made clear in the Mishnah Torah. So the Rambam himself refers back to the Mishnah Torah, to that I just quoted. There's the whole resorting to miracles is just, it's not, you can't use miracles if it contradicts the truth, what you know to be true. If you know something to be philosophically and logically correct, then no miracles can disprove that. So after it has been made clear that the meaning of to know here is in order that people should know, right? It's not because God wants to know, right? It's not in order for him to find out some kind of answer to a test. But the point is, it's telling you a story in order to teach you a lesson so that you should know what you're supposed to do in a situation where you're confronted with similar obstacles and similar problems. So the same can be said with regard to the dictum concerning the mun, right? The mun, which is one of those places, so or the manna, right? So that would be in Devarim 8. I pulled that one up before by mistake. So over here, it says, and I'm going to Devarim 8, prior to it says, "V'zacharta es kol haderech," you'll remember the entire path, asher holichacha Adonai elecha zeh shana, that God has led you on these 40 years, Bamidbar, in the wilderness. Liman anosecha, in order to make you suffer, linasosecha, to test you, ladas, to find out, es asher b'lvavcha, that which is in your heart, hatishmar mitzvosav imlo, will you keep his mitzvos if not? If anything, this certainly seems to contradict very clearly what the Rambam is trying to tell us. So now he has to deal with that. The meaning of this is, according to me, Rambam says, is as follows. In order that the religious communities should know, right? What does it mean to know what was in their heart? Not so that God should know, right? All you have to do is replace the subject, and everything, the verse now all of a sudden means something completely different. Why did I give you the man? Why did I show you how to survive in the wilderness when you're wandering in the wilderness with the resources that you had in the wilderness? So that people should know, religious communities should know this, and that it should be generally accepted throughout the world, that those who devote themselves wholly to his service may be exalted, are expressed, right, are provided by him with food in an unthought of way. That if you stick with the program and you keep and do and live the way God wants you to live, then even when you're in the wilderness, you will find a way to live, right, in a way that you wouldn't have thought of originally, right? You will find a path. If you stick with the program, you'll make it through, just like the Israelites did when they were in the midbar, when they were in the wilderness. They found a way to live, and that was with the man, right? The Rambam is veering us away even from the miraculous nature of the man here. If you listen to the subtleties in his language here, what he's telling you, he says in an unthought of way. He doesn't say in a miraculous way. He's saying you were wandering we could have just thrown up the towel and given up and just starved to death. But no, we found a way to live in the desert. The same notion, right, is expressed when the man is spoken of on the occasion when it first came down, right? This is a similar verse, but in Exodus, when it happened, as opposed to Devarim, which I just read, which is a recounting of what had happened, right? So it's saying the same story from two different perspectives, but it also says the same thing, that I might try them out, whether they will walk in my Torah or not, which means in order that everyone should consider this and should see whether being devoted to a service is useful and sufficient or not sufficient. The Rambam is clear that, and he's going to say, he said this many times before, he's saying it now, and he's going to say it in the future, that to stick with the program and live the life that God asks us to live, right, living the right way, will lead to success. You will make it. You'll figure it out, even in ways that you wouldn't necessarily have thought of beforehand, right? Because it's inherent in the logical keeping of the Torah, which he's going to, when he goes through in a few chapters from now, he's going to start his series on the reasons for the mitzvot. He's going to show us, you keep the Torah, it's going to work for you, right? If you stick with the program. As for what is said in the Torah for the third time again concerning man, who fed you in the wilderness with man, which your fathers knew not, that he might afflict thee, and so on. I just read you that verse, right? It may suggest that God sometimes makes an individual suffer in order that his reward be greater, but this is not the truth of this matter. For this dictum has one of two meanings. One of them is the notion concerning man, repeatedly expressed in the first and second one, in order that it should be known whether being devoted to God does or does not suffice, right? The bottom line is, I'm telling you, being devoted to God will help, right? It will help you get through these kinds of problems, and does not, as far as food is concerned, it gives relief from fatigue and weariness. Or lenasotecha, to test you, or to try you out, or try thee out in this one, may mean to accustom you. It's maybe telling you something else, that teaching you how to survive through adversity, right? By living through adversity, that set up a situation where you were able to be successful later in life, right? In other words, by suffering through the midbar, by going through adversity and getting through it, you become a stronger person and a stronger nation, so that you can then do a much better job encountering the challenges that are to come, right? So that's what nasotecha means here. It's in its second meaning. Number one, it means to show that if you stick with it and you're faithful to the program and you don't give up and you keep on trying and you keep on moving forward, you'll find a way to make it. That's lesson number one. And lesson number two is, if you do that, you're going to be a stronger person at the end, and you're going to be able to come into the land of Israel and conquer it and do all of the things you need to do and go through all of the difficulties and suffering you need to do to hold on to it, to settle it, and so on, right? You're going to be able to do that because you're now experienced in getting through adversity. And I'm going to read it in his words now. Is that Hashem had first accustomed you to misery in the desert in order to make your well-being greater once you came into the land. And this is true, for to pass from weariness to rest is more pleasant than to be constantly at rest. If you would have sat around and had everything given to you, right? It's so different from some people's understanding of man as food falling from the heaven without any effort. The Rambam is teaching you that's just the opposite, right? Man was what we figured out how to live with because we were suffering and we needed to find a way to make it work. So we figured it out with man, right? And if you get through that, and now you come to the land and settle in the land, now you understand, and you finally get at home, and you can finally like sit down for once on a lounge chair and read a book, right? It means so much more, right? But more than that, it is known, but for their misery and weariness in the desert, they would not have been able to conquer the land and to fight. Why were they able to fight so hard? Because they learned how to deal with adversity. So this again. So the purpose of so now we're looking at the story. It's not, God didn't make you suffer because he wanted to see what's going to happen. No, God set up the world in such a way that when we live through hardships because it makes us stronger. That's just the way the world works. That's nature of the universe, right? We live through adversity. We're stronger people because of it. If we make it through the challenges as a private person, as a family, as a nation, then we are a stronger nation and a stronger people to get through the challenges that are to come. The Torah literally states this when it says, for God said, lest peradventure the people repent when they see war. This was talking about in Bishalach when we were. It says God led us through a circuitous way, right? Because if I lead them the easy way, then they're gonna see war and they're gonna turn around and want to run back, right? So instead, I led them through a harder way to toughen them up, right? So that when the Egyptians come chasing them, they're not going to say, "Oh no, let's go back into slavery." For prosperity does away with courage. When we have too much good, we don't have courage anymore. Whereas a hard life and fatigue necessarily produce courage, this being the good that, according to the story in question, will come at the latter end. As for its dictum, when it says, "For God is to come to try you out," right? When the Torah says that, it expresses the same notion as the one stated in Deuteronomy. To prophecy in the name of an idol, for the Lord your God tries you out. This is talking about the false prophet again. The meaning of which we have made clear. He told them similarly here at the gathering at Sinai, don't be afraid. This great gathering that you have seen has taken place only in order that you acquire certitude through sight. How does the Rambam is understanding the revelation at Sinai to be a revelation of truth? The people were confronted with truth. Everyone that was at Sinai saw the truth of the Creator, the truth of the one God, right? And once that truth and the fact that he demands of us to keep the Torah, to keep, well, basic morality as expressed in the Ten Commandments, but the entire Torah, right? And that this truth is something that became ingrained in all of us, everyone that was standing there at that time, right? That was like a prophetic revelation, and we discussed how Rambam looks at prophecy before. And I'm going to get back to that a little bit more when I read to you what I promised about the Akeidat, because we're about to get to the Akeidat Yizchak, right? Be not afraid, right? So, in order to make publicly known the extent of your faith, the Lord your God tried you out with a false prophet who would call upon you to demolish what you have heard. You should remain firm and keep your feet from stumbling. For if I had come to you as a prophet, as you had thought, and I had said to you what had been said to me without your hearing it yourselves, if had you not had that recognition of truth on your own, right? And I was coming to you as a prophet telling you, I'm the prophet, so listen to me, right? This is so crucial. All of us, every single one of us has to come to understand this truth according to Rambam. We can't have faith because Moshe told us so. We can't, no matter how great the prophet is, no matter how great Rambam told us Moshe is, it's not enough that he comes. It's not enough that he does magic tricks and teaches us things. We have to understand that and know that and feel it within our own hearts. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything. And if that's what it is, then it would have been possible for you to fancy that what someone else said is true, even if that other one had come to you with something contradicting that which you already knew to be true, right? This is what could have happened had you not heard it at this gathering. But because you had this experience and together recognized this truth, as a people, we understood and recognized the truth. Nobody can come and convince us out of it, not even if you're trying to start another religion and take us away from our Judaism, right? So as for the story of Abraham at the Akeidah, so I'm going to get to Avraham Avinu at the Akeidah, and I want to read to you from so I've quoted him before. His name is Kenneth Zieskin. He's one of the important Maimonidean scholars. He's around today. He's a philosopher. He teaches at, I think it's University of Chicago, maybe, but I think somewhere in Chicago, Northwestern University, which is in Chicago. I'm sorry, I'm confusing it. But he's a very important philosopher, and he writes. This book is a really good little book. It's called Thinking About the Torah: A Philosopher Reads the Bible by Kenneth Zieskin, right? And he has a whole chapter on the Akeidat Yizchak, which is a beautiful, fascinating chapter. And I'm sorry that I'm gonna skip his initial discussions because he goes through a whole bunch of philosophers, through Kant and Kierkegaard and Nachum Sarna and Levinson and Joseph Soloveitchik and so on. And he goes through a lot of, but then he quotes Maimonides, right? And he's quoting Maimonides from what we're about to read together, but he writes it in his own words and incorporates into this a lot of Maimonidean thought that all of us here together that have been together are becoming more and more familiar with. It's becoming more part of our system. So we will hopefully understand what Yizchak is saying in a really nice way. And he writes so beautifully and so simply that you don't have to be a PhD in philosophy to understand. So although squarely in the rationalist tradition, I'm on page 65 in this book in case you ever get it. But if you do get the book, you'll find it easily. Maimonides interpreted the story, meaning of Akeidat Yizchak, the binding of Isaac, in a way quite different from that of Kant or Kierkegaard. Whatever their difference is, Kant and Kierkegaard both read the story literally. God issues a command, Abraham does his best to obey it, and at the last second, God changes his mind. Time and again. Okay, so that's how they understood it, and they went on their philosophical paths to understand the story, what it means, what it doesn't mean, what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it, so on and so forth. Buy the book and you'll read the whole spiel, okay? Or read Kant and Kierkegaard if you really have a lot of time. But time and again, Maimonides warns that literal interpretation of Bible stories is ill-advised and often leads to error or confusion. His normal strategy, as you and I, all of us have seen many times, is to approach such stories as parables. But a parable for what? Maimonides agrees that the story is about fear or awe of God. When the angel says, "For now I know that you fear God," Maimonides takes it to mean, and we just learned this together, you and all of us, now all people will know what the limits of the fear of God are. It's not that God is trying to find out what Abraham is going to do, right? Remember, Rambam told us this, right? God doesn't do a test to find out what the guy's going to do. The purpose is in order to teach, right, us about fear of God. The normal way of interpreting this is that Maimonides is saying that when it comes to the fear of God, there are no limits. So right away, you're going to think, so what do I learn from Abraham? That if I fear God, and it's my understanding that God wants me, God forbid, to sacrifice my own son, there are no limits to that, right? So I should do anything that the fear of God leads me to do, even something so awful and so horrific. In other words, most readers take him to mean that the fear of God takes precedence over everything else. So Abraham was perfectly justified in taking Isaac to the mountain with the intention of sacrificing him. However, and I added the word however, but recently the philosopher Joseph Stern has argued that if Maimonides had thought there were no limits to the fear of God, he would have said so, right? And you and I are going to hopefully, I don't know if we'll have time today. We might have to read this next week, but that's not what the Rambam says, right? But the phrase, all people will know what the limits of the fear of God are, suggests that there are limits and that it is important to be aware of them, right? What we are learning from Avram and what happened in that story is that there are limits to what the fear of God should tell us, should motivate us to do or not to do. Right? So Maimonides is highly critical of people who starve themselves, beat themselves, jeopardize their health, or inflict unnecessary pain on themselves or others in an attempt to demonstrate loyalty to God. That's something Rambam is repeatedly very much against. In his view, right, everything that God asks of us is designed to promote human welfare, not jeopardize it. So to the question, couldn't God ask someone to do something on a whim to test their willingness to obey? Well, now, all of us that are in this class know Maimonides answers with the resounding no. God does nothing whimsical or in vain. That's not how it works. Everything God asks of us has essentially one purpose: to get us to develop our ability to think and become the most perfect creatures we can be, right? That's it. What he's teaching us here is some lesson that will help us become that kind of person. Why then? So if that's true, so why does Genesis 22 have God asking Abraham to sacrifice his son? And why, having asked one thing of Abraham, does God suddenly seem to change his mind? So to answer these questions, and this is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. To answer these questions, we have to turn to Maimonides' view of prophecy. We can't just look at Maimonides in one little place. We need to remember what he always says. And I remind you of this in almost every lecture. Let's remember what does it mean, according to Rambam, that Abraham had a prophetic vision? Okay, what does that mean? Rambam had chapter and chapter and chapter of what prophecy is. And it is so important. I'm going a little bit off the page here. So important when we understand Rambam that we use his own translations for what he's talking about. I cannot possibly tell you how many times I've had discussions with people that open up a chapter of the Rambam And then when he says a nevuah, for example, the word prophecy, which is what we're talking about now, they used their notion of what prophecy was that they took from a non-Maimonidean source that they probably had remembered from the second grade. And then they think that when the Rambam is talking about prophecy, he's talking about the same thing. And then they interpret the entire chapter completely messed up. So it's important to understand that when Rambam is going to tell us what Abraham heard in a prophecy, the Rambam is talking about the kind of prophecy that the Rambam believes prophecy is, which he spent chapter after chapter after chapter telling us what it is. So how does that play into this story? To answer these questions, we have to turn to Maimonides' view on prophecy. Read literally, stories that say God spoke to someone make it seem as if God produces sound waves in the air, in much the same way that an announcer at a sporting event produces sound waves over the speaker system. So you're sitting in the thing and you hear an announcement, right? Batting first for the whatever, that's not how it goes. Even if only one person is involved, even if the Torah talks about one person hearing a prophecy, as in the case of Abraham, literal interpretation, if you read the verse not the way the Rambam tells you to teach it, if you just read the words, you think that God is issuing audible commands, right? God is saying, Abraham, sacrifice your son. But that's not what Rambam understands prophecy is. And here, this is, according to Maimonides, this is nothing short of ridiculous, right? Prophecy is a spiritual event, not an auditory one. Nobody's hearing instructions. So when the text says God spoke, in his view, the real meaning is that the prophet came to realize what God wanted. The prophet came to an understanding of truth. He went through the process in his mind and realized this is what God wants in this situation. So to understand how this happens, and to think about it, this is just absolutely ingenious. We should note that Maimonides divided the human mind into two faculties. And those of us that understand this, remember, if you haven't, please go back to the original ones because it's lecture number 110. The Rambam has a cognitive model, which I've quoted to you many times, right? His cognitive model, there's the reason and the imagination, right? The reason is sometimes what he calls the active intellect, where we think through things logically, mathematically, scientifically, etc. And then the imagination, in which we use all the images and the feelings and the senses that we receive from the world around us and create images in our mind of ideas, of concepts, of so on. Reason enables us to understand truths such as the Pythagorean theorem or the facts of biological reproduction. Imagination enables us to conceive of a physical thing as if it is actually present to us. In our imagination, we can close our eyes and imagine a mountain or a river or something beautiful that we once saw or some experience that we once had. For example, I can close my eyes and conjure up an image of the Eiffel Tower and so on. There are people with the well-developed faculty of reason, but an impoverished imagination. Think of a college professor who gives the most boring lectures in the world, right? By the same token, there are people with lively imaginations, but no facility for grasping abstract truths. They have a lot of imagination and they'll shoot from the hip and say all kinds of crazy stuff, but they don't have the brains to actually think through what they're saying. Think about a politician who says the first thing that comes into his mind. You can think about who he may be referring to or not. But anyway, so on. What distinguishes a prophet is that both faculties have attained perfection. Remember, we studied this together. What Ziskin is talking about is we all study this together when the discussion of prophecy. This means the prophet can understand abstract truths, but unlike the boring college professor, he can communicate them in a lively manner by picking helpful examples and employing forceful rhetoric. It's one thing to tout the virtues of world peace. It's another to produce the image of people beating their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, right? There's a reason why that image has become so embedded in the human imagination, because a prophet like Isaiah was able to take the concept of peace in the world and give us this image of taking our weapons of war and turning them into implements of peace. Sometimes the prophet's imagination is so vivid that when he grasps an abstract truth, it is as if he can hear an external voice speaking to him. In a similar way, ancient Greek poets often said that writing poetry was like listening to a muse. Maimonides takes this to mean that even if the text has God speaking to a prophet directly, what is really happening is that the prophet is experiencing a dream or vision in which God is the principal subject. So it's as if the prophet he hears this thing, it's so true to him that it's as if he's hearing God speak to him himself. That's what prophecy is. There is nothing magical about this. Who has not had a dream in which one seemed to hear a voice, see another person, or listen to a popular song? The difference is that for most of us, these voices or images are scattered and do not result from the realization of an important truth. Most of us are too scatterbrained, right? We can see and feel and things, and we feel as if we heard things, but they don't communicate anything important, really. They communicate a whole pile of nonsense because that's what our brains are full of, right? Without that understanding, the prophet would have no authority to speak for God. For a prophet, the voices or images are the direct result of an intellectual awakening. So think about this here. Let us now turn to Abraham. Now let's go look at the story, and it's going to sound so different to you. It's going to blow your mind. All of a sudden, a story that's been bothering you your entire life, you're going to say, holy moly, like, how did I not get this? Like, how did I not see this? So here we go. Let us turn to Abraham. When God asked him to take Isaac to the mountain and offer him as a sacrifice, Maimonides would say that what happened? Abraham had a vision in which he came to believe that fear or awe of God had to be limitless to be legitimate. Abraham realized this truth. If I truly fear this creator, this one creator of the universe that's so awesome, so mighty, and so powerful, then no matter what he tells me to do, right? No matter what it is, I should be ready to do it because he's beyond anything that I can conceive, beyond anything that I can imagine. And when I realize that truth, I should be ready to give everything and do anything for that God, right? In other words, he believed a person who feared God will be willing to go to extremes in order to show that my fear is authentic. So Abraham had a vision, right? He thought, what's the most extreme thing I can do? So powerful was Abraham's vision, he imagined God was speaking to him. That's why he rose early the next morning and set out for the land of Moriah and to bring to sacrifice his son, because he had this powerful image, right? Such a great God is the kind of God that I should be ready to do anything for, including sacrificing my son. At a critical moment, then, Abraham had another vision. Remember, Rambam explicitly told us over and over again, so many times, and I say this because it's so important, when an angel speaks from heaven, there's no angel floating around on wings speaking from heaven. According to Rambam, when an angel speaks, it's what's coming into your mind, right? Abraham had a vision and realized, holy, right? He imagined God is now speaking to me through an angel, and he says, unlike the first vision, where Abraham thought fear of God had no limits, he now comes to see, oh, no, I'm wrong. Yes, I'm supposed to fear God, but there are limits. Remember, when you look at the words of the Rambam carefully, you realize we're supposed to learn what the limits are of fear of God, right? There are limits to fearing God, right? Yes, I'm supposed to fear God, but it ends at a certain spot. And where are those limits? Fear of God has to do with having awe and humility. I'm supposed to be in awe of how great he is. I'm supposed to be humble before him, but not with the shedding of innocent human blood, right? But the limits are, I'm supposed to feel awe. I'm supposed to feel humble, but I'm not supposed to go around killing people. In an earlier passage, Rambam captured this kind of humility by saying that when a person compares himself to God, he will realize that he is a vessel full of shame, dishonor, and reproach, empty and deficient. That's feeling, your own ego shattered. You're a nobody. You're a nothing when it comes before God, right? You're not the kind of person that takes other people's lives. You realize how small you are. So the entire story becomes, if you translate it, if we take the lessons we've been studying together this entire time, then all of a sudden you look at the story of the Akeidah, and it becomes a process of Avraham Avinu's, Abraham's understanding of what the limits of fear and awe of God are. That yes, it's unimaginable the kinds of things that we should be ready to do, right, for that truth. But never, ever, ever to harm someone else. This is a strongly worded passage, one that probably goes beyond what most people would accept today. And as strong as it is, it says nothing about the willingness to sacrifice human life. When Rambam tells us what the fear is supposed to lead us to, it's supposed to lead us to this tremendous amount of humility, feeling like a nothing in comparison to the universe that we're in. But it never tells us we're supposed to feel so much fear of God that we go around killing people. On a Maimonidean reading, then, it is not that God relents at the last minute. God didn't change his mind and allows Isaac to live and says, no, forget it, I changed my mind. Isaac should live now. And Abraham comes to see that the position, right? But that Abraham comes to see that the position he adopted at first cannot be right. Letting God into your life does not mean that you have to be willing to commit ritual murder. The same verses that seem to have been saying to us throughout our entire lives, X, is now, according to Rambam, telling us why. It's a completely different story. It's a totally different story. If we take what Rambam taught us about prophecy, we take what Rambam taught us about his cognitive model, we take what he teaches us now about what it means when God tests us, we take all of the concepts that we've been studying together, and all of a sudden we can look at the difficult parts of the Torah and they start to make sense. That's why this book is called Mora Nevuchim. That's why it's a guide for the perplexed. We look at the perplexing parts of the Torah that make no sense. Our childish ways of looking at these things don't give us answers. They give us more questions. We look at the Torah and it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work. All of a sudden, we apply what the Rambam has been teaching us, and it starts to make sense. He goes on, but I'm going to stop here because we're running out of time. But I might continue with Ziskin a little because I do want to go and read the Rambam himself. Now, I'm reminding you that when we read the Rambam himself, he's relying on the fact that you remember what he taught you about prophecy and so on. He's not like Ziskin who tells us this is what Rambam teaches about prophecy. Rambam assumes that when you get to part 3, chapter 24, that you've read parts 1 and 2 and chapters 1 through 23 of part 3, right? And that you've internalized those lessons. If you ever I'm going to warn you again, if you're ever in a conversation with somebody that says, I'm going to look it up in the Moreh Nevuchim and let's see what Rambam really says, right? And he opens it up and starts reading you a chapter and he tells you what the Rambam is really saying. If that person isn't familiar and hasn't internalized all of the Maimonidean concepts, this is a prime example of how you can completely and utterly misunderstand things that the Rambam says. It's very important to keep that in mind. And I hope that this taught us a little bit. I'm sorry, it was my intention to finish chapter 24 today, but I guess it's not going to happen. But we're getting close. If there's anyone that has comments, I have a couple minutes open for some comments, but guys can fire away.
It was wonderful. It's a wonderful understanding of the Akeidat, which of course is just totally perplexing.
Yes. Very much so. Yes, it is. It really is beautiful, and we're gonna do it again next week because we have to read it in the Rambam himself. So we'll have more about it. Any other questions, comments? If not, that's fine. We'll go ahead and
I have one question.
Sure, please.
Does this apply to every prophet that you read about? Are all prophets basically surmising things that they see and feel and understand, and there's a sudden aha moment that is their conversation with God, and they come forward and say these things they're not really told by God? For instance, Noah was not really told by God. This was a understanding.
According to Rambam, yes, and Rambam makes it very clear. I mean, like I said, we did go into prophecy in depth. Ziskin was just kind of very briefly summarizing Maimonides' opinion about prophecy. But the fact that prophecy, according to Rambam, is not, a heavenly voice speaking to you during the night, and Rambam said that very clearly. I mean, it's an intellectual realization of an idea of truth. And the prophet.
So it seems like almost anyone who is a deep enough thinker and understands the facts of the universe, for instance, and understands the facts of the Torah, can basically become a prophet. I mean,
yes,
they can.
And Rambam explicitly says,
is that what we're talking about?
The Rambam explicitly says that the lowest levels of prophecy are levels of prophecy that all of us have access to, right? All of us can at some point, come up to some edge of prophecy. If we're, if you're in a difficult situation, a challenging situation, and you just see the truth, what am I supposed to do? That is, to a small degree, a level of prophecy. What's the right thing to do here? I know you're a physician, and I'm sure you've been in such similar situations, but I've been in situations, in surgery sometimes, or in a difficult delivery when things are under the crunch, and you have various moral and ethical issues sometimes that are floating around that, and then you just what I sometimes do is I take a step back and I say, what should I do? Like, what's the
Yeah.
right thing? You know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you get lost in so many different things, and then you just step back. What's the right thing? And then it's just clear as day. This is the right thing to do. I might not get paid as much. I might get in trouble from my boss. I might have the hospital administration come screaming down my back. I might, God forbid, end up in a failure, and I don't know, I'm going to be in front of a board explaining why I did what I did. But the bottom line is, at that moment, you know this is the right thing to do. And you do it because it's the right thing. And that's prophecy.
Gotcha. And so the other part of the prophecy is going out and publicizing what you believe. And
Yes.
so is that the next step beyond
Yeah,
what
those
you're
are
doing?
as you go up the higher levels. Rambam mentions 15 levels of prophecy. We spent a long time on this, but
Yeah.
I really mean it.
I missed that part.
I
But,
know,
of course,
but
I picked
one
up
of the
later.
those levels is the prophet taking that message to others and teaching it to others.
Yeah.
And as you go up in the levels of prophecy, the prophets and have that ability to do that.
Yeah.
And it's not just you know what to do, but you know how to teach others how to do and how to act.
Yeah. So if you reach that point, I mean, that's a risk, isn't it? I mean, obviously it's a risk. So, I think that just shows courage, I guess, if someone takes that next step.
It's great that you say courage, because the Rambam emphasizes strongly that one of the main characteristic a prophet has to have is courage.
Yeah.
And he has a lot devoted to the subject of courage and its relationship to prophecy as well.
Yeah.
But we'll have to continue this discussion next time, and because we still got to finish up with the Akeidat. So I'm gonna have to do at the beginning of next lecture a little bit of a quick rerun, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much for joining. Have a wonderful
Thank you.
evening.
Thank you, Saul.
Be well, and happy last day of Hanukkah.
Yeah. And to you.
Thanks.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Bye-bye.